Hey, hope you're all doing okay. This is a very weird experience, to be honest, because it's been 2 years into pandemic, and it's really weird to be talking to a monitor instead of an actual audience. But I hope you'll get out of this lecture um, as much as you do in person. So I will be talking about creative process and the art and the Demoscene, and definitely about all those through the lenses of Demoscene. So when I was looking for a title, I basically had to sum up more than 6 months of work and research in one sentence, and this ain't easy. But first thing first. So what can you expect out of this lecture? First of all, an intro, because there always has to be one. I will be talking about art, Demoscene. We'll unpack few terms in order to progress. And then I will be talking about randomness, socioeconomic limits, visual minimalism, live coding, size coding, and eventually compression. And who am I? My name is Andrzej Lichnerowicz. I'm better known as Angelo on the Demoscene and in the interwebs. Although if you try to Google me, keep in mind the actual spelling of my nick can vary from place to another. I joined Demoscene in 1996, and for those who don't know what Demoscene is or never heard of, it is a subculture or community gathered around creating digital short films, along with music and graphics. Interdisciplinary, meaning a demo is usually created by two or more people with different skill set working together to achieve the goal. Computer generated and real time. This is the probably the most crucial aspect of Demoscene. All of the effects are calculated in real time. There's very little pre-calcs going on. 2 years ago, I have started an application that is aimed at enlisting Demoscene as UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage. In order to do that, I have co-founded a community or association. Because of lack of a better word, there is no really a good alternative for komitet społeczny in English. Crucial differences, but I founded Komitet Społeczny Kronika Polskiej Demosceny, Polish Demoscene Chronicles in English, together with my friends Łukasz Szałankiewicz, aka Zenial, and Kaja Mikoszewska, aka Kaja. So you can see my ties with game dev are a little loose. I think the only real game dev experience I had is a little stunt in the late 90s when I was trying to create a game on Symbian phones and failed miserably. So why am I talking here? For the past year or so of writing this UNESCO application and the research I've done in order to do so, I came to a conclusion that games and demos are really similar. They first of all both digital native, and they both offer unparalleled canvas to express unique visions. So the title says art, right? So let's establish whether we're talking about art, and I think so. But games have been of interest in philosophical aesthetics and philosophy of art science at least mid 2000s, and there has been discussion around whether to treat them as art or not. But close to my heart is a 2005 essay by Aaron Schmutz that he argues, and I quote, "By any major definition of art, modern video games should be considered art." So if we do so, and I truly believe they're art, as I said, we can draw parallels between games and other art forms and learn from each other. This man, he is Orson Welles. He is best known for his first film, Citizen Kane, done in 1941, which is consistently ranked as one of the greatest films ever made. But in context of this presentation, more important is a quote that is attributed to him that says, "The enemy of art is the absence of limitations." Let's that sink in for a moment. There's another man I wanted to quote, equally brilliant, although a little less known. His name is Jan Argasiński, and he's associate professor on Jagiellonian University. He says, "Being creative is almost always to put yourself in some kind of constraints, be it formal or technical. Things get more interesting when you make limitations a central theme of your work. You treat constraints as something that works not against you but with you, as a vital part of creative process." This is a quote from a recent SIGGRAPH workshop that Jan was co-presenter on creativity through Demoscene lenses. And video games are also about creativity, same as Demoscene, although games at first might seem limitless. They mostly have, except for indie titles, they have big budgets. They have big engines, powerful engines. Games done with Unreal Engine or Unity, they might appear limitless. But the truth is that every medium has a limit, and it's only to us to find it. So, one could think that it's not a new idea, and therefore there should be people in the history that were trying to find those limits. One of the examples of such approach was a group called Ulipo. It's Ouvroir de littérature potentielle. It was a non-formal gathering of writers, poets, even mathematicians, specialized in working with constraints. One of the examples was a book by Raymond Queneau, Exercice de style, that was where Queneau was describing a same simple story 99 times. And between each story he switched styles, he switched tones to explore the different aspects of limits. In another novel, Georges Perec, in a novel called La Dispersion, or A Void in English, he wrote a 300 pages long text written without using letter E at all. This is so-called lipogram. One of the another interesting rule the Ulipo was guided by is a rule S+7 or N+7. It is to replace every noun in a text with the 7th noun after it in the dictionary. So the phrase "call me Ishmael some years ago" would become "call me Islander some years ago." Results, of course, may vary depending on the dictionary that is used, but it's still quite impressive. There are many other techniques. You can probably read them up on the internet. One other significant would be univocalism, for example, where they wrote poems using words with only one type of vowel. There's also another interesting case. It's a filmmaking movement started in '95 by the Danish directors Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg. They created the Dogma 95 Manifesto and Kuskel's Lufar, the vows of chastity. Sorry for butchering Danish, by the way. But those rules were meant to create films based on the traditional values of story, acting, and theme. They excluded the use of elaborate special effects or technology. All this was done in as a part of the conference, because they announced this at the conference Le Cinéma Version Deuxième Cycle conference in '95 in Paris. The conference where the cinema world gathered to celebrate the first century of motion pictures. and contemplating the quote-unquote uncertain future of commercial cinema. At this event, they purposefully presented this manifesto as an attempt to take back power for the directors as artists and to limit the studio influence. They said, quote unquote, "We just wanted to establish a new extreme. In a business of extremely high budgets, we figured we should balance the dynamic as much as possible." So as you can see, it's not uncommon for artists to choose this way of work. Let's spend some time on randomness now. The likely ancestors of the word random are found in Anglo-Norman, Old French, and Middle French, and include words like speed, impulsiveness, and violence. The early forms are found beginning around 12th century and probably derive from randir, which means to run fast or gallop. Only recently have the meanings of the word random coalesced around science and statistics. The history of this word is strewn with obsolete meanings as the degree of elevation of a gun that maximizes its range, the direction of metallic vine in a mine, or the sloping board on the top of a compositor's frame where newly arranged pages are stored for printing. So all those meanings may seem remote from what we know now, but the true meaning of random beneath the surface really connects to speed, violence, devastation, and even printing. Historically, what's interesting is that truly random numbers were hard, expensive, and slow to produce. They still are. The way that people in the 40s and 50s handled this, they actually printed books with huge collection of numbers. This on picture is an example of a million random digits with 10,000 normal deviates book published in 1947. Demoscene as the entire computer graphics industry these days not only draw from randomness, I think it's very much based on randomness. It's hard to find a computer effect without any number of hashes, both computational or in form of pre-made textures. Pink noise, white noise, FBM, regular hashes. The nature itself, is there a more interesting and important example of creative process? Randomly occurring mutations, random changes in weather patterns, random events. We also drove from nature, and this was one of the ideas behind Ken Perlin work. In 1983, he published a very significant paper out of result of his frustration with the machine-like look of computer-generated imaginary. The function has a pseudo-random appearance, yet all of its visual details are of the same size. And this property allows it to be readily controllable and scalable and give a nature-like looks like on the image behind me. This is a piece by Iñigo Quiles, IQ, and it's called Rainforest. It's a fully procedural terrain and forest in one fragment shader. The allure of randomness, and more generally the allure of chance, especially in games, rest on uncertainty. There's a quote by Nick Montfort, the author of Software Studies and Platform Studies. And he says, "Uncertainty is so compelling that even otherwise skill-based games usually incorporate formal elements of chance, such as the coin toss at the beginning of a football game." But the randomness is not only compelling in games, it is actually very compelling in arts as well, because the randomness and the response this randomness elicits in audience tells much about how people face uncertainty, and this is very interesting from the cultural perspective. Let's back to the demo scene. The demo scene, especially in Poland, was very much shaped by socioeconomic limits. The beginnings of demo scene, it's middle of 1980s, and we are still very much deep in communist era, at least in Poland. At this time, there is a committee called COCOM, Coordination Committee of Multilateral Export Control. This was a group of companies and governments, most notably United States, that controlled sales of products, especially computers, that were considered strategically relevant products. In the 1985, Lucian Daniel Wenzel, by some called godfather of game dev in Poland, but also I would argue he should be called a godfather of all personal computing in Poland, because from his initiative in 1985 in California, he set up Logical Design Works company that worked with COCOM and worked with Polish government in order to start bringing Atari computers to Poland. Of course, he was in a good place in a good time, because COCOM was actually able to lift ban in 1985, but they only lifted a ban for 8-bit computers because they were already outdated in the Western world. Nevertheless, he started bringing those 8-bit Atari computers to Poland through his LDW company in California, and a company that he purposefully set up in Poland, Przedsiębiorstwo Zagraniczne Karen, that was actually operating until late 2000, when it was bought by Computronic. And remember, this was in 1985, which was at least 2 years before Commodore 64 appeared in Baltona stores. That is one of the reasons why Atari was so popular in Poland. The sale of Atari computers was done through Przedsiębiorstwo Eksportu Wewnętrznego, the internal export company called PEWEX. Remember, we're still in the communism, so the goods like computers, they were not available at all in the general market. PEWEX was a weird beast. It was created in 1970s to help combat communist Poland's foreign currency deficit. So you see, it was in the whole Soviet bloc, in the whole Eastern bloc, in all the states, it was actually illegal to own dollars. Poland was somewhat an outlier, like in most of communist cases. So in Poland, it was sort of gray area that the ownership of dollars was allowed, but only as stored in a bank account in PKO, and you couldn't actually own like physical dollars. You had to put them immediately into the bank account. But in order to draw those dollars out of the people, the Polish people, the government set up this PEWEX that was selling the goods that were not otherwise not available, and therefore Atari 800 XL appeared in PEWEXs and costed around $120, which depending on how you did get your dollars, either officially or not officially, you could pay between 1 and 3 months worth of wage for this machine. That is the second reason why Atari became so popular in Poland, because this PC Karen company that Lucian set up was servicing, and therefore those Atari had actual warranty, which was very useful compared to a Commodore 64 that was usually just brought in person by adults, parents, or just smugglers from Western Germany. And you could say that this is old stuff. This is like 30, 40 years ago. Why does it matter? How does socioeconomic limits shape the way we use computers? Because it is happening right now as well. If you look at the GPU prices, the way that Bitcoin miners have skyrocketed them, and you see how little adoption RTX technology has, for example. 2080 RTX, the NVIDIA card, was released like September 2018, I think. So it's like 3 years ago, and we still haven't seen a good adoption of it. And especially on Demoscene, hardly anyone can afford having a good RTX card. So there's really no effects on those features. The other limit I wanted to tackle is minimalism. It's sort of a self-imposed limit. And as you can see on this piece by YX, aka Luna Kirkby, this is only few shapes. This one is a plane, a cylinder, a cone, and few boxes. In a recent workshop, the same Jan took part in SIGGRAPH 2021, Luna said, what's the minimal I can get away with that will still elicit a response from the audience? And this is a perfect definition of minimalism. Like, focus on the core idea that gets the message or mood across, and just focus on this and remove everything else. Similarly to Oulipo, the shader artists often choose only one shape or one color to work with, or even lean on the randomness of Twitch chat. For example, when they stream their work on the shader, they let the Twitch chat, the audience in the Twitch chat, to decide which shape or which color to use. So this brings us to live shader coding. I will show you a 2 minutes video, and later I'll explain some. So what you just saw is so-called shader jump. You might have noticed that in the bottom right corner you could see a DJ. So what shader jumps are, and this one in particular was an event that happened August this year during a party called Nevoke. It's a event where many shader coders jump visually to the set that DJ is playing live. So the DJ is coming and playing a live set, and the coders are creating their version of the visualization for the music. No one really knows the music before it plays. No one arrives with ready solutions. It's all live. The shader jams are not competitive events, but there are two types of related events that are at core competitive. One is called Shader Royale. It is more or less the same event where the DJ is playing and there's a lot more contestants, like 12 at the same time, and every other minute or two a person with least votes is removed from the competition. So the audience again votes, and at the end of the event there's like one left. The other version, more like a Euro Soccer Cup type of competition, it's Shader Showdown. So all the artists are grouped into two-person group, and in a duel they compete for the best shader for 25 minutes, and you have like 1/8 finals, quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals to reveal who won. But the idea is pretty much the same. You come without any cheat sheet, you come without any pre-prepared code. It's just you start when the competition starts. And this live event makes you focus on one interesting aspect as well, because you have 25 minutes. You come unprepared, quote unquote. Of course, you might have been thinking about the effect, but you only start doing it when the competition starts. But also because it's the audience that votes, you really need to adjust the pace of doing the defect as well. So what happens is, if you keep showing the same sphere for 15 minutes out of those 25 and thinking about the effect, or even doing some plumbing in order to bring this all together in 20th minute, your competitor might have been already doing something visually pleasing, maybe not perfect, but pleasing, something that would enjoy the audience, and the favor of the audience might be on his side rather than yours. So this is one of the interesting aspects to keep in mind while shader showdowning. And I think the core of the demo scene these days, because with PCs being so powerful, demos they stopped being so much technically challenging. But the demo scene recently found a real challenge in size coding, both for PC platform and some retro platforms as well. And in the size coding, we have basically a couple of categories. There's 256 bytes, sometimes 512. It is for PC. It's mainly DOS, because PE executable format header is 60 byte alone. So you cannot really waste 1/5 of your bytes budget on the executable header. So mainly we use COM files, but it's a popular format on 8-bit computers, Atari for example, as well. The next one is 1 kilobyte. This already allows you to do some shaders, OpenGL, and very simple raw synths. I think my favorite personally is 4 kilobytes. This allows for shaders and multi-pass shaders and some decent synth music, but it's also one idea. Like you need to come up with one idea and just polish it. And for intro, which is a moving dynamic piece, it's good to be able to show it from couple sides, it's usually still one scene, although the different camera angles and the camera, how the camera works, gives you idea of couple different cuts. But there's also an executable graphics competition where you just focus on one frame, and usually then the focus gets more on a ray tracing and lightning and physically based materials, for example. There's also 8K. It was introduced quite recently, just to give musicians some more space for experimentation. And there's of course a 64K, which is a huge limit, and people are really doing magic with it. And there's multiple techniques that people are using. For example, on Atari, coders, they use self-modifying code as data. They use undocumented instructions that are not part of the official manual, but they have been found nevertheless by clever hackers that, for example, combine couple instructions into one opcode, and therefore you can save space by doing all those instructions with one opcode if you use it cleverly. Also, there's some undocumented OS vectors that can do some cool setup for you. In PC world, people don't mostly deal with compression algorithms themselves, but they do deal with trying to make their code and data more compressible, which is also kind of a skill. And they use the off-the-shelf tools, and by off-the-shelf, I mean the tools that weren't done by them themselves, but usually they've been done by fellow sceners. Examples of such tools can be Crinkler, K-Crunchy, or Squishy. It is a very interesting field, compression, from a philosophical point of view, which I will be talking in a second, but also from a technical point of view, because in the size-limited world, you deal with different trade-offs than you usually do in the broader sense of the world. So some of the techniques that are not feasible, for example, to use in a demo, which might be couple to hundreds megabyte big, they definitely can make sense in the realm of 4K or 64K. And let me show you an example of an intro. That particular one was 4093 bytes. This is a 4 kilobyte intro. The intro goes in full HD 1080p for 3 and something minutes. The video capture on YouTube of this intro is 200 megabytes, which makes a video about 50,000 times bigger. It's a beauty of procedural generation. And now let's go to compression. This person, this guy, Gregory Chaitin, probably. I'm again butchering some Spanish, but he said that comprehension is compression. And that means that from a philosophical point of view, you need to exactly understand what you are doing. In IT terms, in computer science terms, and compression is encoding same information using fewer bits. And with the bigger the data, the more data is not crucial, which means you need less data to get the same meaning. This is essentially what MP3 compression does. The filter analysis removes redundant data, and the rest is compressed losslessly. Elimination of redundant data means it's not really required to get the message across, to get the mood across. It goes back again to minimalism and everything we really been talking about. The size coding, especially 4K, 8K, 64K intros, they make heavy use of compression, but as you've probably seen, and maybe counterintuitively in a way, but all of those limitations, they basically boil down to compression in a way. There's a great paper by Phil McGuire, Philip Moser, and Rebecca McGuire. And in the conclusion they say, at first blush, the concept of data compression seems esoteric, a niche idea related to information storage in computer science. However, we can see that the concept runs much deeper. Data compression occurs when information is bound together through the identification of shared patterns. For example, the sequence 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 18, 20, 24 can be simplified as the description odd prime numbers plus 1. The latter representation is shorter, hence we can say that it has been compressed. Following Occam's razor, the elegance and concision of this representation suggests that it's the true underlying pattern which governs the sequence. Someone who manages to identify this pattern might claim that to have understood the sequence, because with high probability they can predict the numbers that follow. And that is a beautiful summary of everything I've really talked about. You have no ready solution. In the creative world, you have an idea, but you need to fit this into particular limits. And compression is a cognitive process related to understanding the code, the medium that you're using, the tools that you're using, the platform. All procedural generation algorithms are based on this idea as well, to find the underlying pattern. Creativity involves a process of compressing, finding this minimal value, this message that you want to get across. Perhaps creative process involves a systematically consideration of possible chains of links which satisfy some specific criteria and in some specific order. But what I think is happening is that the brain searches for chains of links by imposing specific criteria for selecting such chains. That's why the constraints, the limits play such crucial role, but then somehow randomly it considers the possibilities. And there's also this feedback mechanism, which has the effect of continuously adjusting the selection criteria. Either way, being creative, these are the best tools you have. Thank you for your attention, and now let's get to questions.